My name is Bradley Steyn. I was born in Pretoria, South Africa. Growing up, I witnessed firsthand the brutality of hate and apartheid. And as a teenager in 1988, I survived a massacre that would change the course of my life forever. And that's why I decided to take a stand and join the intelligence unit of Nelson Mandela's spy network. In the course of our dedicated efforts during that time, we successfully unearthed a sinister plot to assassinate Nelson Mandela at his 1994 inauguration. This was a pivotal moment in South African history. Would we go into civil war, or would there be peace? But it also marked a significant stride towards advancing human rights for all us South Africans. Little did I know, a hit was placed on us, and I just managed to escape South Africa and find refuge abroad. I used my experiences and my expertise and teamed up with leading security professionals, where I was fortunate enough to work with some of the most fascinating people in the world. Now I'm back in South Africa, ready to take on the rising tide of crime, murder, and corruption that has tainted South Africa's journey towards liberation and our democracy. Join me, Bradley Steyn, your co-host, along with journalist and author Janet Smith, and our special lineup of guests as we go undercover. In this series, we will be declassifying our past, while we bring you the untold stories of our silent warriors, activists, and patriots. We'll also get a different perspective from our youth, where our democracy is today, 30 years later. Through these conversations, together we can shape the future we aspire to.
Bar and Stradom's racist massacre on a public square in Pretoria was one of the defining events of the last years of apartheid. It was November 1988. Global condemnation and international boycotts were finally grinding the world's supremacist outpost to a halt. But even as expectations grew that there could be a peaceful transition to democracy, some, like Stradom, believed whites were being betrayed. The former policeman and army conscript set out to make his statement in the most horrifying way possible. In total, 8 black people were the victims of his rage. The blood that covered the piazza outside the State Theatre also came to mark the boundary between freedom and a form of captivity for Bradley Steyn, who was a teenager when he walked into the mass shooting. Bradley's life was spared by the killer because he was white. Yet that bloodied boundary was so destructive to his mental health that Bradley eventually put down those experiences and the astonishing true-life events which followed into a non-fiction thriller, Undercover with Mandela's Spies. This podcast takes you on a journey with Bradley and a number of extraordinary guests to examine the toll South Africa's battlefields has taken on our minds and how we can continue to work on our shared recovery. I am Janet Smith, and in this episode, we welcome former Azanian People's Liberation Army commander, forgiveness activist, MP and author Letlapha Mphahlele to a conversation about what it means to fight for your country and what the understanding is today of young men trained to defend apartheid and young people trained to defy it. Please join us for How to Face War, which is created in honor of Stradom's second victim, 58-year-old Piet Mphahlele. Piet was a street cleaner who was doing his job when he was shot in the neck on Stradom Square. He was putting refuse in a bin on Pretoria's main thoroughfare, Church Street, when Stradom came across him during his murderous rampage. Thank you for joining us.
An honor to have you with us, Letlapha. I wanted to begin with a tweet you put out recently in which you noted that 44 years ago, on that day, you had woken up in the bush near Gaborone, Botswana. You said that was where you had spent your first night in exile. You wrote in your tweet, "I shook off the dust and grass from my clothes and headed to town. I waited for the shops to open and for the sun to warm me. That day I read Cry, the Beloved Country." You were very young back then, 17 as I recall through my research. Letlapha, were there any colored people or white people in APLA? I was a white cadre fighting against apartheid at the time. We were essentially on the same team fighting against the apartheid methodologies.
Yes, it's true that when I left my family, my village in the then Northern Transvaal, I was 17 years and I was doing what was then called Form 3. And my first night in exile on the 16th of August 1978, I spent it in the bush in what is today Gaborone West. And of course in the morning, as it is expected, you cannot sleep in the bush until the sun rises. You have to wake up at dawn or pre-dawn. About the racial composition of APLA, yes, we did have people from different race groups. We did have the so-called coloreds. We did have people of Asiatic origin, Indians. And we did have white people, and most people don't know that. And one of them, Comrade Pedro, upon return and integration of non-statutory forces, he joined the South African National Defence Force. And not long ago, he was in the country, but currently he's based in Angola. And it's true that the PSC has the tag of being anti-white racist party. But even at its formation, the first chief representative of the PSC in Algeria was a white person.
That's very interesting. That's fascinating. Letlapha, you've said that war is evil, but from time to time we rationalize it. Sometimes we view it as a necessary evil. Some people will call it just war. Others will call it holy war. So by doing so, I'm not just saying I'm following the wrong side. Actually, I'm convinced that I follow the right side for the right cause. But the injuries that individuals have suffered need to be healed. And those who are living, like you and I, should see to that we heal our wounds. That made a huge impact on me, Letlapha. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, it is worth noting that our attitude to war is not universalized. The religious people would say there is holy war and unholy war. And in Europe, there is a just war and unjust war. And of course, in Africa, the liberation movement, we did embrace that, the concept of a just war. It is worth noting that in Africa, all wars were regarded as morally questionable. I'm saying this because upon return from the battlefield in Africa, there was a cleansing ceremony, and I think it is there even among traditional communities in presently. That's why in Zulu there's intelesi. Now, it doesn't matter whether you are justified to kill or not. Even if you kill a thief who had stolen your cattle, still there would be a ritual because people understood that much as you can justify violence, but violence should not be part of a normal living. Now, coming to the rationalization of war, surely people fight because they can justify it one way or another. Some will say we are defending our values. Some would say we are defending our stolen land. Some would say we are defending this or that. But I think that after those rationalizations and justifications, at the end of the conflict, human beings need to build bridges. And actually, they can even find constructive ways of achieving what they set out to fight for. I firmly believe that what I was armed to fight, which is justice as far as land ownership is concerned, it is not achieved even under the present majority rule government. However, must I fight? Is it justifiable to fight? Now, it is interesting that some of the people that I was fighting against share the same opinion. For instance, you, Bradley, when I look at your current political outlook after reading your book, I'm convinced that we are on the same side of justice, a social justice and economic liberation. And in my opinion is that the more bridges we build across the historical divide, the better we can find each other and one another as far as resolving the present challenges is concerned.
Absolutely. And yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So here's an interesting question. Is it an ongoing harm to you that most white people still don't see themselves as complicit in apartheid or in racism? And we got this question. The reason we came up with this question was because through my research, we came across something where it stated that a lot of white people didn't take responsibility for the day-to-day humiliation of our regular black citizens. You know, I know the Truth and Reconciliation, for instance, addressed the major atrocities that were headlined or that were more notoriable. But, you know, the question itself is, do you think that white people in South Africa today, rather back then, did not really take responsibility and they just said, it's an apartheid thing, it's got nothing to do with us?
Well, you have sharpened the focus in South Africa, but as far as I'm concerned, white power is universalized, is all over. Yeah. And all over the world, white people seem to be seeing things as normal. And white power is taken as part of nature, that you know, it has to be there. But now that we have focused in South Africa, whereas I think white power is a universal phenomenon. Yeah, in South Africa, most white people, even those who were there and even those who benefited from the white supremacist laws, feel that they are innocent. And why do they feel that they are innocent? Is because they did not kill someone. Mm. They did not commit crime. Now, they forget that guilt can be metaphysical, that there was a system, you benefited from it, and you said nothing, and you did nothing. And that put every white person as a beneficiary of the system. But unfortunately today, people think that just because they were not like Eugene de Kock, they did not run Flag Plus, therefore the prime evil is individualized, whereas the prime evil is the system. Did you benefit from the system? Did you have privilege and enjoyed privileges because of the color of your pigmentation? And if that's the case, how dare can you claim innocence?
Yeah, no, and I think you're spot on there. And, if we have a look at the grander picture, the global world, as you might not know, I lived in the United States for many years, and, the rise of white power in the United States since the Trump administration and came into power is very remnant of the way that apartheid was structured, and the superiority complex of white power, that those ideals, etc., are very remnant of what Black South Africans went through, the dehumanizing, etc. And I just wanted to add that in there. I also had another question, because I know that churches were targeted as well. So churches too. One of the APLA soldiers who was involved in the massacre at the St. James Church said churches in South Africa had also been complicit in taking land from blacks and oppressing them during apartheid, that white churches were used to oppress blacks. He said, whites took our country using churches and Bibles. We know, and we have read from books, they are the ones who have taken the land from us. And, as we look at history, we know, ministries, etc., finding new lands, used the Bible and used the church. Do you agree with that? Was that very much part of APLA's justification for attacking churches during war?
To the best of my recollection, APLA attacked a church once. It did not attack churches. And of course, it was not for the first time that a church was attacked in a conflict. Regina Mundi in Soweto was attacked, I don't know how many times. But the biggest attack on church happened in 1906 in the Eastern Cape, where the followers of Mgijima, hundreds of them were mowed down by South African Defence Force. So, yes, I agree with the APLA soldier that in APLA, as part of APLA teaching and doctrination, we did not differentiate between the oppressor in church and the oppressor in uniform, because we regarded white people as being collectively guilty, and they had to taste their own medicine.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Letlapha, if I can come in here, I think the dominant image of you has changed radically over the years. So the Letlapha Mphahlele of the 1990s was a very powerful individual in black communities, a very powerful individual within communities who did not necessarily agree with participating at CODESA, did not necessarily agree with entering a non-racial parliament as it was structured. You were a hero for many, many, many millions of black South Africans. Then there was a process of, or there was a move by yourself to seek dialogue within white communities. And that, again, altered perceptions of you. That, too, was a very powerful shift on your part. And you've continued to do that in South Africa. So when Bradley's talking about different states of war, and you're talking about different states of war, I believe that you have moved across those in ways that many other people have not been able to do.
Yeah.
You had the credibility then, you have the credibility now. Does that strike you as a reality in your own life?
Well, if you call it war, perhaps you are right, because both types of war, the violent one and the non-violent one, demands one of courage. Perhaps the latter demands even more courage, because you can be lonely and be ridiculed and be treated as someone who has betrayed, the flock or the many. Yes, indeed. For me, it has been a very interesting journey that when one was fighting, when one never knew that the people one was fighting were individuals and had individual outlooks. And the person who set me on this journey was Ginn Fourie. I first met her in Cape Town at the launch of my book, which was hosted by Cape Town Press Club. And after, questions mostly by journalists, about things that I'm used to answer, are you a terrorist or what, etc. And Ginn Fourie stood up and asked me a question, whether I did not trivialize the TRC. And what struck me most was when she identified herself as Jeanette Fourie, mother of Lindy, the young lady who died at Heidelberg Tavern because of APLA attacks. Then I could see that beyond that question that she had answered, that she had asked, even after I had answered it, I requested for off-camera lenses meeting where there was not going to be journalists and cameras. And later on, to shorten the story, we did meet again in Cape Town, and she asked me whether I believed in God. A very easy question to most people, because most people believe in God. But with me, I've been an atheist for more than 2/3 of my life. So I do not believe in God. But now, did I have to tell her that I did not believe in God after she had suffered the loss of her daughter, her only daughter, at my soldier's hands? Or must I lie, tell her lies that actually I believe in God? Hallelujah, amen. But I thought that I had to be truthful to her. I told her that actually I'm an atheist. And she went on to say, do you believe in spirituality? Yes, I believe in spirituality, because for me spirituality is connectedness with oneself, with community, and with the cosmos. So I told her that I believe in spirituality, and she extended a gift of forgiveness. So that gift of forgiveness, more than anything that had happened to me, charges were thrown against me: terrorism, murder, attempted murder, possessions of arms of war, etc. But that gift of forgiveness, for me, it was so profound. It was like rehumanizing me. It was like, reinstilling humanity in me. And if people who had suffered, loss of lives of their loved ones can still have the courage to treat you as a human being, what is it that you have left to do is to prove that you are a human being. Hence, Ginn and I, travel the world even places in South Africa, talking about forgiveness. And people think that when you talk about forgiveness, then you have given up demand for justice in land restoration, demand for justice in social equality, etc. No. Forgiveness for me is a personal journey. Is something that an individual decides on or decides against. You cannot legislate forgiveness. You cannot legislate against it because it's strictly personal.
Letlapha, if I can reflect on a conversation Bradley and I were having in preparation for this podcast, we pictured you in these different stages of your life and this growth that you have experienced and put out there to all South Africans. You have behaved in a very unusual way in that it's been a public shift for you over 30 to 35 years, not to mention those earlier years when as a very young man you made a decision to leave South Africa and to fight for freedom. During our discussions about you, Bradley and I were examining the concept of self-defense. Was it self-defense that led to you deciding to dedicate your life to APLA? And when placed in a similar situation, would you regard other people taking up arms for a period as self-defense, but towards the end of freedom?
Well, my participation in APLA, or APLA itself, was not the beginning of armed resistance. The armed resistance started long back, by what we call Khoisan people in the Cape.
Yes, indeed.
Basically, it was in defense of their land. Skukuni, Shaka, Mshweshwe, Hinza. It was in defense of what? In defense of their land and their way of life. And one could not separate what our forebears did with what soldiers in MK did, soldiers in APLA did, and soldiers in Azanian did. It was in self-defense. Now, as far as violence is concerned, certainly I'm not a pacifist. I think that there are some forms of irrationality that you cannot talk away or negotiate away.
Yes.
One will have to defend oneself physically, which means through the arms. But should it be the first option? I don't think so. I think some forms of violence are unjustifiable. And unfortunately, this is what is prevalent, especially in Africa. You go to South Sudan, you find people just fighting over nothing, sometimes over the difference between ethnic, belongings. You go to the TRC and many other hotspots in Africa. Those, for me, are not justifiable. But of course, if a territory is occupied by an invader, what do? You will have to fight back.
Letlapha, seems to be somewhat of an instinct for people to reflect on the St. James Massacre, the Heidelberg Tavern Massacre, when it comes to you. And clearly your life is quite a lot bigger than those two events, for which you were the director of operations and for which you have atoned and for which you have expressed regret in different ways. And I think Bradley wants to address a particular aspect of this, because the St. James massacre just seems to be attached to you, in spite of this greater life that you've lived. And if I can turn to Bradley, we were talking about Charles van Wyk, who is now, is part of Ginn Fourie South Africa and so on. So he too has become quite a lot bigger than that event.
Yeah, exactly. Yet there are other white people who made some important changes in their lives as a response to your openness. And I'm thinking of Charles van Wyk, like Janet just said, who was in the church on the day of the St. James massacre, and who missed possibly being killed by about half a meter. Your fellow soldiers stormed the church with M26 hand grenades and R4 assault rifles. Charles van Wyk then wrote a book called Shooting Back, the Right and Duty of Self-Defense, based around how he had returned fire that day with his 38 Special, wounding one of the attackers. And the two of you met later and visited the APLA operative who had been involved in that attack in jail.
Correct. In this journey, should I call it journey of forgiveness? I'm not sure. Perhaps a journey of meeting fellow human beings across the color divide or across the violence divide. Yeah, one of the people who made huge impression on me was or is Charles van Wyk. I first met him in Cape Town. And of course, I liked him for the first time I met him. Not that I agreed with him, he struck me as a very conservative person. His political outlook for me was too conservative. But there's something that I admired about him. He was so truthful, so honest. People who are honest, even when they are lost, I tend to appreciate them, unlike people who pretend that they are in one wavelength when they are not there altogether. Long story short, yes, we together we visited Klinikaya Makoma, the youngster who survived, Charles' bullet, but of course, because he got injured, and of course he lost some blood, and that blood was very crucial in convicting him. So, yes, he was convicted and sentenced in prison. We went there, and of course, we have been, friends ever since then. And I must point out that he too invited me for a church service.
Okay.
And I told him that, Charles, I don't believe in God, but for your sake, I'm going to attend that church service. And of course, it was a church service after decades. I last attended a church service, and he called it a spiritual ambush. So then I must point out that around the same time, Charles van Wyk wanted to arrange a meeting with the priest who was, who was ministering in the night of St. James attack.
Oh.
And I was more than willing to meet the priest. But unfortunately, the priest, the pastor, wrote, 4 conditions of meeting. then I felt that now it was becoming political. And I had to harden my political stance as well.
What were his conditions, Letlapha? I mean, I think that is something that is very interesting to me.
Among other things, what did APLA and PSC hoped to achieve by taking a church? And another thing, a public apology before the meeting. I recall the two.
Yes.
But the other two that I've forgotten were as provocative as the two.
So in other words, he saw an opportunity there to as you say, to politicize it, but also to have a platform, which was under the circumstances completely, yes, that was an ambush and not a spiritual ambush.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And it could have changed your course had you agreed to that. Yes.
Ambush, yeah. So, but of course, as a matter of fact, I'm still willing. As I say, this is a journey. It's not a destination.
Yeah.
I'm more than prepared to meet, the priest. Yeah. But the meeting should be just unconditional and even private for that matter. We may not even need publicity to cover it. So yeah, that has been a journey, whereby one tries as much as possible to depoliticize, whereas the violence was within the political context, but really you cannot say somebody must go out and make a public apology and tell the world what is it that they hoped to achieve.
Yes. And in fact, quite a lot of the work that you've done with Ginn, in particular, has not been publicized. You haven't had press conferences where you've said, this is what we're doing and this is the reason we're doing it. And I think one of the assignments that you and Ginn took on, and when I say assignment, was like a human assignment, which affected Bradley, was Plattfontein. So when we're talking about war and we're talking about facing war, you and Ginn went into the community of Plattfontein where there were these men who had been forced into colonial armies to fight on the side of those colonial armies, and who then lost their way of life. They had a hunter-gatherer way of life. They'd been living in a very traditional way, and then they were forced into these armies to fight other people's wars. That was an interesting choice for you and Ginn to make, and I think Bradley was affected by that. Perhaps you can tell us how that impacted on you.
Exactly. I found it fascinating, and so please.
Yeah, I've been to Plattfontein twice. Well, several times, but the first time I went there wearing a different cap, the PSC cap. And what I found, we were in a hall, and everybody except us, people who had visited there, it was during elections, except me and my entourage. Everyone was tipsy, actually drunk. I could see that there's something, eating into this community. Yeah, but subsequently or later, I went there wearing a different cap altogether as part of Ginn Fourie Foundation. And the previous visit, I was seeking votes. But the second visit was all about healing.
Right.
And I must say healing is not, to those people who think that they are receiving it, it's even self-healing. Because Plattfontein struck me as a human dumping ground. Because those people were trackers, I'm told, in the apartheid South African Defence Force.
Yes.
Mostly were from Angola and Namibia. Some, from Botswana, or they once lived in Botswana.
Yeah, I recall a lot of those guys being 3-2 battalion guys that work with 3-2 battalion. Yeah, no, sure.
Yes.
Letlapha, tell me something. Have we done enough reckoning with all these wars we took part in?
Well, enough, is an overstatement. Have we done reckoning? No matter how small it is or little it is, I think for some reason we are evasive about the reality. And the reality is that until we confront that we are a traumatized nation, I don't think we are going to get it right. And we have moved away from political violence, the violence of APLA, the violence of SANDF, the violence of MK, Azanian, etc., even the violence of people who are marching the streets, But that lack of healing, it is expressed in domestic violence, in gender violence, in so-called xenophobic violence, and other forms of violence, taxi violence, all over there is violence. It is because we are sidestepping something which is very crucial to the health of the nation, that of dealing with our pain and our past.
Yes.
Wow, that's
So
very powerful.
This circles back on the extract from your book that you read at the beginning, Bradley, and I suppose I'm directing it at you too, Letlapha, that there's a tremendous focus on black men and what black men have the difficulty, I suppose, in coming to terms with many social ills. But Bradley well knows, he's dealt with it himself, that white men carry huge amounts of fury and anger, and particularly white men of the SADF generation. And that also impacts on society. So I wonder why we sort of allow that part of our society, white men and the ills that they bring on society. We don't seem to talk about that much, and yet what you've just described is a reality. It's all enmeshed, isn't it? So those men who were in the SADF as teenagers, who haven't been given an opportunity to really face up, it's problematic. It's problematic if we do not face those wars as you've just described, because it all the violence we're seeing today, I completely agree with you, is a result of not reckoning.
Absolutely. And what to me is so interesting and is the fact that there's such a stigma. I'll go back to this, like I mentioned it before. There's a stigma around mental health, and there's a stigma around if you're feeling weak or not physically but emotionally, and you want to deal with your mental health or deal with these traumatic things you've experienced in the past, there's this big stigma about no man, we just will ruk ourselves reg, or we'll pull ourselves towards
and this
ourselves.
is the country's mental health, right?
Exactly. But it affects our greater country, because all these atrocities, whether it be pent-up PTSD from a soldier, and he takes it out on his wife and family, and there's gender-based violence, or there's somebody that just doesn't know how to manage their anger, etc., from conflicts that they've been in, or painful situations that they've been through. For listeners out there, there's no shame in going out and getting help and trying to heal and just talking things through, because it's amazing how powerful conversation is when you don't have these boundaries up, where you're constantly trying to be the alpha male, or not show any weakness. Letlapha, I just want to ask you, what is in your mind the deepest need at this point in our nation on how we can do better as patriots and citizens, and because we've come a long way?
Before I answer your question, reading your book, I was so heartened when I read, where you are showing the burden of guilt of the white person, especially those who served in the army. And when I went through that, part of your book, I recalled a conversation I once had with a friend of mine who is a district surgeon. He had to treat someone, and when of gun wounds, and when he investigated what had happened, apparently a man entered into the shop, bought whatever he wanted to buy, and when he was given change, he grabbed the shopkeeper's hand, put it flat on the counter, and put his on top, and shot both of them, both hands. And the man turned out to be a former SADF member.
Wow.
And he was showing me, because I had actually visited him because I was concerned that a lot of ex-combatants from the guerrilla army did not go through some form of counseling. And of course, we have many cases really of people that you see that they are not good mentally. And mental health, people are not ashamed to go public and say, I've got a headache or I've got malaria. But with mental health, even family would create, protection around you so that neighbors should not know that you are not mentally well.
And get stigmatized.
Yes, indeed. I think besides what we need to do collectively as a nation, but I think some specialized form of intervention is needed to the ex-combatants on both sides of divide, those who were for or those who were against apartheid regime. Now, what is it that we need to do to rebuild this country? It's a pity that everything is politicized. When people, for instance, I was speaking to a friend of mine, a youngster, and he told me that don't forget that whatever you say, they don't say you are saying it. They think that PS is saying it. So I'm no longer an individual. I'm a political party or a political banner. So I think we have put too much in the hands of politicians. That for things to move, we need Madiba Magic, if it's not there, Ramaphosa's New Dawn. I think the civil society, people at the grassroots, should regain their voice, and actually they should be the ones who truthfully and honestly who come up with remedies to what we are going through. And there is a lot of dishonesty. I mean, I'm still a politician. I know that when I speak as a person and when I speak as a politician, There are two different people. As a politician, I speak what I think my audience would like to hear. And as a matter of fact, I won't speak same language depending on the constitution of the audience. But as an individual, I am more honest and truthful than as a politician. So hence I find the personal space be more comfortable because it resonates with my conscience. Gotcha. Whereas the political one, sometimes you are even given a written speech that you should not deviate from this, and as you read through it, you find that some of the things you actually don't believe in. So,
yeah, but
what you are asking...
I think it's very important that our politicians are, held accountable for their, reckless behavior, inciting violence or inciting racial divide between our citizens, because, I've been away for a very long time and I've come back and I've just seen that, for the most part, our people really do get along. And, there's acceptance of different cultures and different beliefs, etc. But, it's the politicians, that use their political agendas. And I completely agree with you that, us as a collective society with, I'd want to put humanity and kindness first so that we can lift ourselves up together, and is the most important thing. And, we can't rely on government to do these things. We need to do this as a society.
I agree with you totally, because what you have already started, even before this podcast, trying to reach out to the survivors and to the families of the victims of Stray Dome Square or Lillian Ngoyi Square's victims. Now, this may look small in appearance, but I think they go a long way in terms of stitching the wound and healing the past. Mm-hmm. And as for politicians, sometimes I sympathize with them. Because take Verwoerd. Verwoerd, I'm told, they say there was an old man in my village who used to say what he hears of Verwoerd in public, or what he heard of Verwoerd in public, because he I think when I heard him, Verwoerd had died already, was different from Verwoerd that he knew. Mm. You take Terre Blanche. Terre Blanche actually spoke fluent Setswana, or almost fluent Setswana. And some of... and people may not know it. He had a girlfriend who was an indigenous African or a black woman. Now, I think politicians by nature have a dichotomy of character, split personality. Even people who say they are feigning, racial hatred, if you go to their private lives, you find that it's different. It's just that the temptation of getting more votes, overwhelmed what the sense of being right, or or doing the right thing. So, and of course, sometimes, of course, people would say, if people are not violating the Constitution, so what's wrong with that? So, what's wrong with the existence of AfriForum, for instance, even if it's clearly pursuing a racist agenda, but you cannot pin them down using the Constitution. So, which means what we need to do as a society, we must do more than the Constitution is prescribing us to do.
And Letlapha, you know, as we wrap up what is really, in fact, quite a difficult and profound, heartfelt discussion, I want to return to the theme, which is how to face war, because I think, in fact, you've answered that. How you face war, and Bradley has done the same thing. How you face war is to do it openly, honestly, not pretend that it didn't happen, not pretend that we're not still at war through these various forms of violence that play out in our society every day. And it's got to be a commitment. Many people don't know that you are a politician as such. Many people only see you as this forgiveness activist now. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier on, that you have lived your life and your shifts in your life in a very public way. And I can only say that I admire that greatly. Bradley too, you know, we hold there's a lot of strength that we can hold in a person like you. And just to say many thanks from our side for this discussion, and looking forward really to your next writing, your next piece of writing, your next appearance, really speaking to people from this place.
And I was actually incredibly moved by yours and Ginn's conversation on forgiveness. Because it struck very close to home for me. Because I've lost family members in South Africa as well, and it was just so powerful and so moving. And I just wanted to thank you very much for your insight and your knowledge, and how much you've learned through all these years and through all these difficulties, what a great individual you've turned out to be. And thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time.
I'm equally grateful, and I'm looking forward to see you, Bradley. I was so touched by what you said after you had lost your brother-in-law through violence on his farm, and something really that some people found as an opportunity to attack you as a person. It's such acts of greatness that really should be highlighted. It's just that even the mainstream media is not helping us, because the news that are out there hide, inspiring stories like that article, and of course, Villeray, I think, wrote back in your defense.
General Vieri.
So, yeah. yes.
The righteous betrayal.
Exactly. Yes. And thanks so much for the invite. Thank you, and thanks to all.